Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Psychological Safety, Why It Is More Critical Than Ever, and How to Truly Foster It. Thank you for taking your time today to join us. We're fairly confident this topic has never been more relevant than now. We're going to bring together for you thought leaders and innovators from the Joint Commission Center for Transforming Healthcare and from Huron Consulting Group to talk about psychological safety and its vital role in preventing harm. I'm Vicki Choate, I'm your MC for today. I have the privilege of leading our quality, safety, and high reliability strategy and services for Huron. We have a couple learning objectives for you because we are distributing continuing education for this session. At the end of our program today, you will be able to define psychological safety as it pertains to the creation and sustainability of a culture of innovation and safety. And you'll be able to recall 2 strategies to put into place to improve the psychological safety in your organization, your unit, or your department. In order to qualify for the CE, you need to stay in this live session for its duration and complete an evaluation. You'll receive a link following the completion of this program to the recorded video and to the evaluation, from which you'll be able to automatically download and print your CE certificate. We're going to use a pretty cool app called Slido. You can find Slido at slido.com on your smart device. So now would be a great time to pull that up. Once you pull up Slido, you're going to enter the code 975976 and you'll see it populate. We're going to use Slido today for questions and for polls. So as you have questions for our thought leaders, enter them in Slido. And certainly have Slido on the ready. We have a number of poll questions for our audience. Our 2 speakers today and thought leaders are Craig Deo, Managing Director from Huron Consulting Group, and Anne Marie Benedicto, Vice President from the Center for Transforming Healthcare. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Vicki. This is Craig, and first question we should always ask in this environment, can you hear me okay? Terrific. Yeah. So, hi, Anne-Marie. Very much looking forward to the time together with the audience today. We have, this is the 2nd time Anne-Marie and I have had the opportunity, along with Vicki and team at the center, to share some information about patient safety in over the last several weeks. And this is a topic that was actually voted on by those of you who attended the last session, where we asked what was most top of mind for you in terms of areas you'd like some more input on and discussion, and psychological safety was by far #1 on the list. So that first learning objective is to make sure that we know what we mean by psychological safety. And there's really 2 things. I mean, the first is to make sure that I can really be myself, bring my opinions, my perspectives to share with others in this group without any consequences. And when we talk about consequences, they can be multifactorial. It can be to my own self-image and self-worth. It could be a consequence to my status reputationally in the organization, or maybe even, a career limiting action. And the second important element here is that it's really a shared belief across a group. It's not just something that exists between 2 people. When we talk about that condition of feeling safe with another person, that's what we mean by trust. When we expand this to a group of people across a team where we all believe it's safe for us to take risks within this broader group, that's psychological safety. And ultimately, psychological safety is a culture where people don't fear punishment or retribution or embarrassment when they speak up with candor and speak truth to power, when they offer ideas, when they bring up problems and tough issues, when they ask questions, when they admit mistakes. And as you all know, this issue of feeling comfortable admitting mistakes is at the heart of safety. When Amy Edmondson and her team were researching psychological safety 30 years ago, they had a hypothesis that they see a very strong correlation between teams that had high psychological safety and quality. But initially they found quite the opposite. In fact, it was so surprising that they asked another researcher to redo their questionnaires and their observations, but it confirmed their initial finding. There's an inverse relationship between high psychological safety and quality. And it turns out it wasn't that the highly psychologically safe teams were making errors. It's just that they were reporting them more. A story that, looking at the attendee list of the many of you who kind of grew up in the safety movement like I did, know is at the heart of safety, is that confidence and being comfortable reporting. They felt safe to speak up, knowing that there weren't going to be any negative consequence. It was a way to help them get better as a group by speaking up. So we want to take a moment and we want to find out, what really brought you here today, and give you a chance to practice using Slido as well, to answer this first question. Why is psychological safety important to you? So I'm going to go over to my app here. I have Slido downloaded as an app on my phone. And if you go over to the polling tab, which is the right side, you're going to find this poll question. And you can just type in free text, why is psychological safety important to you? Excellent. We're going to see results come up live here. And interestingly, role modeling psychological safety, you can choose to be anonymous as you fill this out or put your name to it, which is also an indicator of psychological safety. But we don't know each other, so you might not have that level of psychological safety yet. Oh, this is great. We're seeing lots of results coming in here. We've got about 20 of you that have taken this so far, which is a good indicator that it's working, and many of you have found it yet. Just reading through these as they come in. Oh, these are so powerful. Builds trust, learning from mistakes, to identify errors so I can mitigate them. Improve engagement, I like that connection. Really nice. Okay, so we're gonna let this go for about 15 more seconds. Ten more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we captured 68 of you responded here. And as I just kind of scroll through these, radical belonging and inclusiveness, I really like that one standing out to me. I want to feel trusted, which is nice. If I model this for my team, they speak up more. It's a good sense of trust. Increased retention. I like that you're connecting it to the #1 issue on all of our minds right now about workforce as well. So really nice examples here. And I'll tag in my co-presenter here, Anne-Marie, to see if anything stuck out to you. Anne-Marie and I will trade off on content a bit too. But Anne-Marie, did anything else stand out to you that I haven't commented on yet, or themes here?
I really do like the radical belonging and inclusion. And we will touch on that. That's a world to explore, how this applies to that, to the desire of an inclusive workforce that is fully participatory. Very inspiring.
I agree. That's really nice. So there's 4 key elements to psychological safety, and we're going to touch on these throughout the time that we've got with you today. So the first, as I mentioned, is that it's determined at the group level. And that means you can have a very safe team on your unit where you feel comfortable speaking up, but maybe the macro system, the organization, doesn't feel safe in some other areas. And likewise, the opposite could be true. We've seen legions of examples where, perhaps the senior leaders role model the right things at the top to support safety, and they do a good job in their role. But all it takes is a chilling incident on a team or one leader or teammate that reacts negatively when somebody speaks up, that creates that sense that this isn't a psychologically safe team. So it's really the smallest unit of groups is where you need to think about psychological safety existing. It's also highly influenced by group leadership. In fact, part of the research Amy Edmondson's team did when they were looking at this was to examine specific leaders in hospital settings who'd led different teams across the hospital. And they realized that the impact the leader had on creating the environment that supported psychological safety was really profound. Leaders drive the group culture, and they set the tone for safety or lack thereof. And finally, the fourth element, research has found that psychological safety is a feature of this group environment, not a matter of personality. So, many of you work together in a multidisciplinary team, and you know that those different professions had different learning paths, different knowledge, different approaches, traditions. But for a care team to truly break out of silos and put the patient at the center and work as a group, there has to be effective psychological safety. Psychological safety becomes the glue that allows different people in a team to work together. And if you think about how this affects the organization as a whole, 3 out of 10 workers agree that their opinions seem to count. Now, a couple things about this. This is from 2017. This is before the last 2 years and 3 months have really rocked the world, changed the trajectory of safety in a lot of organizations. Only 3 out of 4 agree that their opinions count. And this wasn't just healthcare, this is all data. And if you doubled that, if you moved it to just 6 out of 10, of course, we'd like 10 out of 10, organizations could reduce turnover by more than 25%, 40% fewer safety incidents, and 12% increase in productivity. So there's a tremendous ROI as well in safety. And there's several domains where we believe safety, psychological safety has a profound underpinning aspect. Certainly safety over here on the left, both worker safety, employee safety, reduction of defects in manufacturing circumstances, effectiveness, all of that. But there's also these other 2 elements that we don't necessarily talk about as much, certainly not in the past. This really grew out of the safety tradition. But let's talk first about innovation or cultures of excellence. If you want people to speak up and say things, part of what you're going to get out of that is the people at the front line, because you're deferent to frontline expertise as a high reliability organization, you're going to get them coming up with ideas for improvement and innovation. And in fact, on the surface, a high reliable organization and an innovative organization may seem counterposed. How can you have a culture that's fail safe and fail proof at the same time? And the thing that actually unites cultures of innovation and cultures of safety is having people who are comfortable speaking up. And finally, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which certainly, I think the dots have connected very nicely with psychological safety in the last couple of years, as so much has risen in this topic in workplaces and society in general. Is my unique self, my voice, my perspective really honored and appreciated in this group? Or do I feel uncomfortable bringing myself, my unique identity, my voice to the circumstance? So psychological safety, we believe, is critical across all 3 of these, and we'll talk more about each. But again, we want to get a sense of what brought you here today, and you can select all that apply. So if more than one of these applies, that's fine. But back in Slido, if you go over to the poll tab, you'll see this option. Which application of psychological safety is most important to you right now? And we'll wait till we get about 60 or 70 folks responding, which is what we had on the last one. So no surprise to me, Anne-Marie, that safety would lead the way. That's largely the group that we reached out to for this. And as I looked at the attendee list, a lot of the roles, but it's really encouraging that at least a quarter also see innovation and DEI here. Yeah, thoughts on that, Anne-Marie?
I'm not surprised as well. I actually think the 3 are very much linked. Craig, you and I have talked about what could possibly happen if all the safety issues in healthcare were suddenly solved and we reached high reliability and the innovation that's going to come out of that, as well as the growing sense and recognition that our greatest asset is the talent we have, our staff, our people, our teams, and making sure that they fully participate, that they bring all their gifts to work is what's under DEI.
Critically important. That's great. Well, with that, Anne-Marie, I'll turn it to you. And the last session that we did, we touched on high reliability, and maybe start by playing off that and making the connection here, because they're intertwined, but it might not be as obvious. How do you view the connection here with psychological safety and high reliability?
Thank you, Craig. So let's talk about safety, since that is top of mind, and that was also one of the reasons why people have tuned in. High reliability in healthcare is defined as healthcare that's consistently excellent and safe over long periods of time across all services and settings. And we have not seen a healthcare organization that's 100% highly reliable, although many organizations have made that their goal. Now, high reliability organizations have a culture and a set of management principles that reinforce harm-free performance. Many of you are familiar with Wyke and Sutcliffe's 5 high reliability principles, which we also discussed during our last webinar on resilience. And we often talk about these principles from the perspective of operations and process. Today, we'll talk about them from the perspective of psychological safety and how psychological safety underpins each of these. And we'll start with sensitivity to operations, which is situational awareness. In HROs, staff are trained and are expected to recognize, isolate, and address what's unusual, anomalies, because we believe those are early signs of a potential problem further downstream, and that's easier said than done. Psychological safety is spotting potential for harm and then acting on that knowledge, not just recognizing it and fixing it. For instance, a patient who is at high risk for falls is not wearing a band or the right booties, and so you fix that. But also an employee recognizing that they need to communicate that, because that could be a sign of a system failure. Because if it happened once, it could happen again. And that should be easy to do without thinking, it's such a small thing, I don't want to bother anyone, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Reluctance to simplify is the second principle, and that is pushing back against simplistic answers, even if it's convenient. Healthcare organizations are incredibly complex entities, and safety threats may have different causes, and usually do have different causes, and that's why they persist. Understanding a situation often means taking part in discussions and discovery with colleagues who share widely different perspectives about their job, how they understand phenomenon, and seeing a problem from multiple angles helps us discover and validate sources of harm. And that is difficult to do without the ability to have open discussions that help you get to the heart of the problem. Preoccupation with failure means that people are not satisfied with the current state. It means thinking and planning for how things might go wrong, where things might break down, and addressing those risk points before something goes wrong or breaks down. And that's great. That's how we achieve consistent excellence. But if you think about what it takes to do that and how different that would be, that you not only look for risk points, but you happily report them. And those reports are happily received. And so you go to your manager every morning and say, I walk the floors, and these are the 10 things that are going wrong or could go wrong. And your manager says, fantastic, let's get to it. Deference to expertise is not about seniority or position in the hierarchy. And if we don't create an environment where people speak up and make them feel welcome while doing that, then we risk losing those that source of experience that would help us lead, especially in times of crisis or trouble. Commitment to resilience, the last one, refers to an organization's capacity to recognize errors quickly, contain them, and then recover. And this is critical for error reporting systems. And if you ask people to report in the system and then don't take action and nothing changes, they'll stop speaking up. In addition, psychological safety is needed in recovery and speaks to how systems and the people who work in them recover and learn. So highly reliable healthcare or healthcare right now, even if it's not highly reliable yet, these are dynamic systems. There are a lot of variables working together to prevent harm. Safe systems are important, of course, and the workforce, the people who operate within that environment, also have a huge role to play in ensuring that safety continues. And safety requires psychological safety. James Reason developed the Swiss cheese model to illustrate how analyses of major accidents and catastrophic failures tend to reveal multiple smaller failures that lead up to the accident. I call this, well, it's often called the cascade of small errors. In the model, each slice of cheese represents a safety barrier or precaution relevant to that particular hazard. The holes in the Swiss cheese represent defenses and their weaknesses, and harm happens when the weaknesses line up and errors go through. In reviewing accidents or sentinel events, it is striking how many errors line up to cause a failure. It is also striking how many people knew that something was wrong and either did not speak up or spoke up and was not listened to. So this is critical. Speaking up is important, but it's a first step. There has to be someone on the other end listening who will do something about the information they received. Craig said earlier that psychological safety is determined at the group level. It is not enough to tell people to speak up. This is not about one person speaking. This is about a group. Psychological safety is about speaking up and listening and acting. If one person is able to speak up and we listen and act, then the system weaknesses are counteracted and we can prevent harm. Now, we are social creatures and our actions are informed by the culture we live in. Unless we create an environment where the team feels safe collectively, the likelihood to speak up is diminished, and so is our opportunities to prevent harm. A strong organization-wide safety culture is essential to high reliability transformation. The concept of a safety culture is common among industries that operate in high complex, high-risk environments. And we have talked about how psychological safety plays in this, but some people tend to discount psychological safety as light and fluffy. And they say, I have high performance standards. Isn't that what matters? And of course, that's important. But the two do work together, and they have an interesting interplay. If you look at this, the 4 boxes, and start with the low psychological safety and low performance standards, so the lower left box. If you have low performance standards and low psychological safety, no one bothers to do anything. If you have low performance standards and high psychological safety, so going up the box, people are really comfortable and they're not going to do anything, but they'll feel good about it. The high performance standards piece is tricky, and particularly tricky in healthcare. Because if you have high performance standards, which we do when we deliver care, and low psychological safety, what happens is everyone gets just very anxious. The anxiety zone. They're going to feel anxious about speaking up, and quality and safety is going to suffer. And if you have high performance standards and high psychological safety, that's where we hit the learning zone. That's where high performance, really high performance, is possible. And psychological safety spurs learning and avoids performance failures. So as leaders, we need to set high standards and then really inspire and enable our team members to reach them. And just one more thing about the learning zone. People's ability to learn, this is such a common feature of daily life that I often forget how incredible it is. So meeting new people, learning how to interact with them, new technology, new procedures, new jobs, recipes, cultures, countries, language, leadership styles. So many things and aspects of our lives are enriched by our ability to learn. The ability is the foundation for change, for improvement, for innovation and transformation. So let's talk about what stops us from learning. Fear stops learning, and specifically learning something new, going on to a new improved state, using an innovation that might be better for us in the long run, also means that something's ending. The loss of power or position, we had talked about earlier about how losing status is really important to people. The second one, temporary incompetence, is that phase when we have given up on an old skill but haven't learned the new one yet. The fear of punishment for incompetence is when people worry that they will be punished for lack of productivity because they're still learning something new. Loss of personal identity, will something new change how we see ourselves? Or will I no longer be part of a team or group or division that I was proud of? So loss of group membership. As leaders, we should recognize that people might be feeling many of these things as we expect them to navigate change, to implement solutions, to try different ways of doing and behaving. Psychological safety means taking these fears into consideration and making it easy, or as easy as possible, for people to transition and learn. So you might be telling yourself, we don't have a problem with that. People come to me with issues all the time, so I'm good. People complain to me all the time, so they must be feeling safe. To really understand psychological safety, it's important to understand what happens when it's not there, when people don't feel like they have a voice to truly speak up. So what cannot having a voice look like? It can look like your high performance failing at tasks or making obvious errors because they're not asking for clarification, they're not asking for help along the way, and they are stopping themselves from speaking out. They're self-censoring. They choose to be silent, and that is a symptom of poor psychological safety. The second kind of scenario is if you have really great people who are not being intellectually curious. That also is a sign of poor psychological safety because they want to figure out what you want. And so they calibrate their answer by what they think you need. And they, again, self-censor before they speak. The final thing is when people try and show perfection. So they project a perfect image. If you're not open to errors or if people are distancing themselves because they feel they might be blamed, then that's 100% for psychological safety. Because these are all instances where somebody is again stopping themselves from speaking up and self-censoring. And a little bit about this idea of perfection, which applies to every organization that has hierarchy, which is every organization. And I think this is especially true in healthcare, where sometimes I've observed that people feel they need to earn the right to speak. All of these environments show how we moderate ourselves and our voices in the work environment. And it also shows how, or if we are comfortable speaking up, and how often do you see these behaviors in your organization. So who's at risk? I say we are all at risk. There is not one person I know of who has never felt the awkward pain and shame a little bit of being unable to speak. Even though you feel you should be able to speak and what you say matters tremendously, but it's simply not okay to speak. There are factors that influence the likelihood that a person will experience low psychological safety. And while there seems to be a greater desire for an inclusive and fully participatory workforce, there's also a recognition that not everyone feels that they can bring their true self to work. In fact, many employees feel that they need to hide who they are in order to fit in. Organizational hierarchies are probably the most obvious place to look. They influence psychological safety greatly. And influence is based on position, titles, unique skills, and responsibilities. Usually, the higher you are in the hierarchy of your organization, the greater the psychological safety is that you experience. There's also clinical versus non-clinical in healthcare, patient versus non-patient facing. The second one is if you're a member of a historically marginalized community, different race, ethnicity, LGBTQ+, gender, and even language, accent, age, weight, that makes a person different from the majority culture. It is hard to speak up if people don't see you, or if you feel that your words will be discounted or dismissed. The third one is majority groups where shared identities are the majority. This may or may not be a historically marginalized group. An example could be a department or a division within a larger organization that has a different mission, purpose, or business model than their colleagues. For leaders, we need to recognize and consider the situation of our team members and colleagues and how it affects their psychological safety. So I really like this quote. If everyone is moving together, then success takes care of itself. Everyone moving together forward gives us the greatest chance to succeed. And our leader's responsibility is to facilitate and navigate change. Healthcare is hard right now, probably the hardest it's ever been. We are in the third year of a pandemic, and we hope in the midst of recovery. All people in every industry has been affected in a personal and professional way, and healthcare has been at the sharp end. As we recover and respond to lessons learned and to the challenges in front of us, it's critical to keep our people and our patients in mind. Psychological safety is not a nice to have right now, it's a requirement. It's essential to building a stronger health system. It's essential to reimagining what that might be. And it is really important in helping us reach zero harm. So it's not possible to talk about psychological safety without referencing the Redonda Watts conviction in Tennessee. and the effect this may have on an organization's reporting mechanism, and how essential it is to keep those going to keep patients and staff safe. So the next slide is a slide that shows an algorithm, which many of you are familiar with. It reaffirms the need for reports of errors to learn about our system failures and to use these lessons to build stronger safety systems. The belief in strengthening systems, not changing the human condition, but changing the conditions in which humans work, is promoted by using incident decision trees to come to fair and consistent action towards staff involved in patient safety incidents. The example on the slide is from the UK, the National Health Service, and it's based on James Reason's culpability model, which is the basis for many algorithms, just culture, incident decision trees that healthcare organizations use. The tool's aim is to create a safe and open culture where employees feel able to report patient safety incidents or employee harm without fear of consequence. And the tool, just like the Just Culture algorithm, is structured by a series of 4 questions. We won't go through every pathway, but I'll just go through the 4 tests. The first is deliberate harm. The overwhelming majority of patient safety incidents, most of the time the individual who made the error was focused on the patient's well-being. The deliberate harm test helps to identify at the earliest possible stage those rare cases where harm was intended, both if the individual's actions were as intended and the outcome was intended. So looking at those separately, in majority of the cases, the actions were as intended even if the outcomes were not. If the intent to harm is discounted, the incapacity test helps us identify whether ill health or substance use caused or contributed to the patient safety incident. And if those first 2 were discounted, so incapacity and intent to harm has been discounted, the foresight test examines whether protocols and safe working practices were adhered to. And majority of patient or employee harm safety events involve protocol violations. This is usually the most challenging test and underlines the need to work through facts and discovery because those will not be obvious first pass through. Managers will then need to consider if the incident happened because there was no protocol or procedure in place, if the protocol was problematic for many reasons, outdated, hard to read, hard to find, hard to understand, so many reasons. If there were conflicting protocols, or if there were good protocols but they were misapplied, routinely violated, workarounds are endemic in healthcare, or not regularly used, or if the individual decided to ignore the protocol. The last test is the substitution test to help assess how a peer would have dealt with the situation. This helps us examine variations in training, experience, or supervision that might have affected the incident, and assess whether the individual had the resources they need or the support they need to effectively deal with the situation. The incident decision trees and the thinking they represent are important because they help us move from the simple, outdated solution of blaming the individual who made the error. Instead, by using this tool, we recognize the complex environment where safety risks play out and tease out lessons where we can learn about our systems and how to make them stronger so that errors have less impact. I'm going to turn it over to Craig, who will share an example of a health system's response to Nurse Flott's trial implementation.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. I appreciate it. And while you were talking, I also saw a few questions come in on chat. One was, can we get a copy of these slides? We'll send those to you. Another was, this image is a little hard to read. We might be on a smaller device and there's a lot here. The good news is when you get the slides, you can expand that at your leisure. And there's a way to adapt your screen settings in this Zoom meeting as well if you choose to. I will note that we're running nice on time. We're going to have a good bit of time at the end here for some Q&A. And so if you go over to Slido, you can see 2 tabs at the top. We've been using the poll tab on the right when these questions pop up, and we have one more to come. But if you go to the Q&A tab on the left, if you enter your questions there, that'll allow us to sort of look at them in all one screen and address that. But there was one that came in on chat that I'll just talk about because it's, I think it's relevant to this foresight test. Do the individual depart from agreed upon protocols or safe procedures. And the question was basically, well, who gets to determine what's an agreed upon protocol, right? So the question was, what about the potential risk of the cultural context and learned behavior? What's considered normal or adverse in a culture? And it reminds me of one of my favorite concepts in safety called the normalization of deviance. So once a group of individuals continues to ignore the safer behavior, it becomes the way we do things around here and becomes the sort of de facto accepted standard. And the easy example of this outside of the healthcare environment is that the warning labels on some household goods, like on your ladder, that says this is not a step, but your dad used the step, your mom used the step, your kid used the step, so you use the step, and suddenly there's a fall, but it's because you've normalized that behavior that's deviant from the safe practice. But ultimately, that decision about sort of who sets the tone for what the practice is, I think, is very interesting, and it is shaped by those cultural contexts and experiences. So all of you have probably wondered, what do we say or do right now in the wake of the incident that occurred with the nurse in Tennessee? And I want to share with you something that hit my inbox last week. Been privileged to spend a bit of time with UPMC out in Pennsylvania and other states on the East Coast. And I got permission to reprint this letter that their executive leadership and quality leadership sent out to the leaders. That was the first of a series of communications that will also go out to staff, just reminding them of our view of how our organization is going to support you if you speak up or if you make a mistake. And they're very specific and tying it back to their values, which is a good time to elevate the purpose, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's a really key step to put psychological and safety in motion, is to connect it to some bigger reasons why it matters. It also reaffirms here in this third paragraph that we don't believe any of you come to work to do wrong. As Anne-Marie said, the first step on that algorithm, we'll go back to that, is that upper left block is where the actions intended to cause harm. And there are a vast minority of cases when that's the case. And if so, we have to act swiftly with consequences. But the vast majority of the time, that's not the case. And so there needs to be discovery and learning in this. And I like the bullet points here that made it very explicit about how this particular organization is providing resources to support the organization. And then the final, couple of highlights here are about future communication forums. Town halls are being planned with the broader organization, and the leaders are importantly being armed with talking points that reinforce the importance of speaking up and sharing our challenges, because the last thing we want this to do is to have a chilling effect on individuals, because we know how important it is to have those learnings. So what can we actually do? And the last polling question that's going to come up in 5 or 6 minutes here is going to ask you what you want to commit to doing to increase psychological safety in the groups important to you. And there are 4 areas that we'll talk on. So we think about fostering a psychologically safe environment. These 4 keys start with having, 1, clear performance standards that align to a higher purpose. And so this is about making sure people understand that there's really a level playing field. This isn't about playing favorites or bias towards one individual or against others. And that's key to feeling safe. And again, we'll drill into each of these in more depth in a moment. The second is that when you ask for input, you're showing that you don't know everything. Humility is this value that we all prize as other humans. We want to be included. We want to know that we're all on a journey together, and it shows that you value each person's insights. My colleague, Dr. Amer Kaisi, who's faculty at Trinity University in San Antonio, writes a lot about the evidence that the most effective leaders have a combination of humility and ambition. And he actually coined a phrase, humbition, to talk about the characteristics of the most successful leaders. And a lot of what they end up doing is modeling these attributes that foster psychological safety. Number 3 is about transparency. We talked about transparency with standards, but it goes deeper than that. If your team has an expectation that you're going to be transparent with them, they're going to look to you to help them improve. If they know that candor is okay, they're going to tell you what they actually think. A tip on this is, if you do a town hall or you do a session like this and there's questions, even if you run out of time, commit that you're going to answer every single question that you get. And people start seeing, oh, they're not trying to duck the hard things. Stand in front of the room and answer the tough things, even if the answer is, we can't talk about that and here's why. If you do a practice that we've recommended for a long time called rounding for outcomes, that's really helpful to get the input, but you also have to close the loop and show them that you're addressing what was heard. And so reflecting back what you heard and what you did about it on something like a stoplight report is really helpful to that. And finally, one of the common themes of successful leaders is that they actually celebrate failure. It shows that you tried something new, failing fast, getting to the learning, and then improving how you're doing it, those small tests of change. Failure is where a lot of the learning comes in the scientific method. This isn't saying that you're gonna make failure okay or safe that causes harm. Part of this must be repercussions for negligence and intent to cause harm. But this is a view that failure in itself is natural, it's normal, it's part of the learning process, and it's how you respond or react or encourage that has the impact. So I'm going to drill into each of these four in more detail, and I'd encourage you to jot down on a piece of paper to yourself, perhaps, or go ahead and type into Slido, which of these you might want to think of implementing. So let's start with the most important thing to start with, which is setting the context, the stage, clarifying for people why it's important to have their voice shared. It frames the work that we'll do. A tip on this one, when I facilitate meetings, I often remind people, you're in this small room representing a group of people. You have a unique voice. If your voice isn't heard, we'll miss that perspective. And so we need to make sure that you speak up. And that's more effective than saying, hey, everybody, you have to speak up today. Explain why it matters to speak up. So what kind of actions could you take to do this? Making sure that there are shared goals that are meaningful with the team, be explicit about the behavioral standards that promote success and provide clarity on what's expected. Think about the expectations around failure and uncertainty. One organization really reinforced that failure is safe at the beginning of the year by writing failure insurance policies on them. Now, this wasn't in healthcare, it was in a financial services sector, but they said, we want you to take risks. And so we're going to write 3 failure insurance policies on you. Anytime you take on a project and it's not successful, redeem one of these policies. And by the way, there's a form that you fill out, which is basically what you learn from this, and we'll celebrate that with you. And it's immunity from any repercussions. Of course, if this causes harm or bankrupts a company, that's a different story. But the catch was, if you don't redeem all 3 failure policies this year, we won't renew your policy next year. And it was actually giving people not just the encouragement, but almost the mandate that you're going to take risks and stretch a little more than you would to do things where failure is inevitable as part of that. Now, of course, I'm not talking about known best practice. You don't innovate on things like the surgical timeout. Like, you don't do a small test of change and say, like, well, 10 of us will do the surgery with the timeout and 10 of us will skip it today and see what happens. I'm not talking about those things. We're talking about the unknowns that we'll have to try. Your organizational culture will have an impact with this. If your organization strives to have transparent, consistent standards, but culturally, you don't really share organizational goals and you dissuade individuals from sharing their own goals, then you're going to have to start in your team, your microsystem, encouraging them to speak up, share their goals, their objectives in your own weekly or monthly meetings. So pause for a moment, think about what an absence of this looks like in your organization. Do you know the goals and targets of everyone on your team? How about your peers? Are they working to the same goals that you are? What actions would be most powerful for your team here? So take a moment and think about that. That might be one of the answers to the poll question in a moment. So once we've set the stage, it's important to invite participation. This is about making sure that once you've made it clear there's a need to hear from people, that their voice is actually valued, that their voice, their opinion is actually something that you want to hear. So what could you do in this space? First, it might be acknowledging that gaps exist in this area. That humility in itself is powerful. Ask for input from the team to inform your priorities. Ask for feedback on presentations. If you facilitate a meeting, ask the people at the end of the meeting to rate the meeting. And if they don't rate it perfect, thank them for that. In fact, there's one leader that one of our colleagues work with, that when somebody points out something that could be better, an improvement opportunity, that's what triggers them to write a handwritten thank you note, that it gets really rewarded and prized. But I think this last note is very important, that it's got to be part of structures and processes. This is not just about speeches and training. I'll tell you, I've been part of lots of trainings where we encourage people to speak up. I don't see a big enduring effect in a lot of organizations when they do that alone. So systematizing this is very important. Here's an example. One organization found that their meetings were low candor affairs where the highest ranking person's opinion was shared and everyone else would just defer to that. In fact, it was so bad that they called the highest paid person's opinion the hippo. Do you like that? The hippo, an acronym? And so one of the ways that they reinforced the importance of speaking up was that they made a rule called 3S, 1R. It stands for 3 solutions before we have 1 recommendation. So if there's a solution from the hippo that comes across, the more junior people in the room have to come up with 2 more solutions, or we can't even make this recommendation. And wouldn't you know it, that organization found that in a pretty significant amount of times, it's that second or third possible solution that's the one that actually comes out of the meeting. That wouldn't have even come up had there not been this structural approach to ask for it. So think about, when's the last time you asked someone on your team for help? And how much practice have you had in saying, I don't know the answer to that? So think about what actions you could help show people that their voice is really welcome. And then the final one is that responding productively has to be about how you close this loop. It's about pushing an orientation towards continuous learning and improvement. Praise and appreciation are often opportunities for improvement. Do you have a 5-to-1 ratio of positivity to criticism? Do you say when people have an idea, but it's not quite perfect, are you quick to say, no, that's not going to work because of this, or no, I'm not going to do that, but this? Instead, build upon that with a yes and phrase. There's actually a lot of training and the science of how those communication build upons can be effective. Use language that's shared and inclusive for the group as individuals, back to Anne-Marie's guidance on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, a note about candor, it can get a bad rap at times, not because of the words, but because of the music. A lot of times when people don't really like candor, it's because the individual delivering it, their body language, the tone of voice, perhaps the intent behind that might be the challenge. But we always say thank you for feedback. We appreciate when people give us that candor, but we need training and practice to deliver tough messages to people, particularly in positions of power, in a way that it's actually received well. You can have all the right words, deliver with the wrong music, and it doesn't land. But the words with the right tone of voice, body language, and good intent can make a tremendous impact. And finally, responding productively is also about respecting and destigmatizing failure. We have to look at failure as a way to learn, a way to provide evidence that we're going to take positive steps instead of punitive action. And it reframes the role of the leader from having all the answers to setting the direction, from giving orders to inviting people to clarify and improve, from assessing other people's performance to creating conditions for continued learning to achieve excellence. So let's go to Slido, and you should see a poll question in there now asking what actions you're going to commit to today that will help your people feel safe to speak up. And while you're doing that, after you answer that question, you can go ahead and check out the Q&A tab in Slido, which I will go to now. And it's, oh gosh, we've got good questions. That's awesome. So we'll let this run for a little bit, and then we'll invite Vicky back, and she can help us field some of the audience questions that may have come in from various platforms. So excellent first answer of being candid. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer. Lead by example, share reported safety issues with the entire staff. Oh, that's excellent. Practice humility, model the behavior. Good, 3S1R, got picked up by someone here. Asking people proactively what concerns they have. And you might asking, instead of, do you have any concerns, you might give them a specific target, like, could you share 2 or 3 concerns that are top of mind for you? We find it, people are much more likely to speak up if you actually give them specific guidance on that. Clear standards, make it structural, be the one to speak up. If you're not the boss, that's great. It's both ways. I really like that. It's not just all on the leader. We have to have a bit of courage that comes with that also. I read a great novel recently that was talking about how courage isn't about being brave. It's also about faking that you're brave. It's really the same thing. Reaching out to staff regularly to ask for questions, open door policy, that's all great. So we'll pause here, and I'll invite Vicky to come back. And let me turn it to Anne-Marie first. So is there anything that you saw here as you were scrolling through that maybe I missed you want to comment on these comments?
I liked very much how some of these are also questions, acknowledging that many things are changing right now. particularly around safety and around how organizations handle risk, how organizations handle safety, and how they balance those. So I can't find the comment anywhere, but someone said they were concerned. And how do they encourage their colleagues to speak up if they themselves are concerned? And those are great. And I don't think we need an answer for that in this group. I think sharing that emotion, owning it, is powerful. And your team will probably tell you, us too. And so, then it becomes a situation where you are looking at that together. It is your group figuring out what works best for you.
Great point. So Vicky, I'm hoping that we have some other questions that came in. I'll just leave this up here for folks in case we don't get to your question and you want to reach out to either of us. Contact information for Anne-Marie and myself is shown here. Vicky, did we get any responses? I see you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you for catching that, Craig. Yes, we do. We've got some questions in chat that have come in throughout the presentation, and great job, Craig and Anne-Marie. First question that came through chat at around 12:30. How do we help leaders who think they are making it safe to speak up, but their actions, words, tone are not aligned with creating psychological safety? Most of those who are lacking self-awareness would adjust if they realize this because they believe in it, want it, but need to know where to get them, how to get them there. And there's a corresponding question to that in Slido about what are the tools available to assess your self-awareness.
So I'll answer the first one, and then maybe I'll ask Anne-Marie about how do you assess your performance on this. The kindest thing you can do for someone you care about is to help them point out their blind spots. The people who tell you that you have food in your teeth or that your zipper's down are not strangers. They're people who care about you. They don't want you to be embarrassed. They see something that could be even better, and they put their own discomfort aside by pointing it out to you. So to the question Vicky shared, for the person who thinks they're doing a good job, but you observe it differently, practice with a colleague how you might approach them in a way that shows that you truly care about them and want them to be successful. And there's one thing I've noticed that can help you be even more successful. When you do this, what I see sometimes is that your body language says this, and I wanted to bring that to your attention because, again, I really care about your success. I did that very quickly and poorly, but some message like that shows how much you care can be a real act of kindness. Anne-Marie, how about you in terms of, how do you assess psychological safety and these other, cultures of safety issues?
I will get to that. I liked your answer. I also like in addition to once you've set up that open space and you're talking to your leader about their effect, perhaps being curious about them, asking them about what they're trying to do, what effect they want to produce, because that's learning for you too. And also it builds the relationship. So the curiosity can go both ways. In terms of assessing, blind spots, I think what's worked for me and what's worked for a lot of people is working with a trusted colleague. Many behaviors and the disconnect between what you intend and what the outcome is can come from a very personal place, and so do not navigate the hierarchy first with that, or ask your direct reports, but start with a trusted colleague and say, can you be my partner in this? This is what I am trying to achieve. Tell me how I'm doing, and sort of invite them in to your journey. And if it is really a lack of self-awareness, I think they will tell you if you invite them in, although you might have to ask several times. The next step, once you've identified some blind spots, is to actually talk to your direct reports about not necessarily what you're doing, but why, and then invite them in too, and say, I will need some coaching, or I will need some guidance in terms of how I'm achieving those outcomes.
And on measurement, I would just add, Anne-Marie and I are both fans of Amy Edmondson's pioneering work in this. And if you pick up a book called The Fearless Organization, as a researcher, she lays out her questions in there. And in fact, there's a dozen or so questions that she has validated that are really effective to ask this. And you could start small. You could build a Zoomerang survey in your own area and use this as a tracking tool against yourself. You won't get peer data. But when we assess organizational culture, that we work with organizations, we actually build those questions in because we think they're so foundational to assessing organizational culture in general, not just for safe practice.
We have a question that's gotten a couple likes on Slido, Craig and Emery. How do you think the recent conviction of a nurse due to medication error, how do you think, what impact do you think that's going to have on psychological safety?
Well, I think the word chilling has been used, and of course it will. People will. That could happen. I would like to think that the reaction of organizations like EPMC that Craig shared is going to be one of several examples that we'll see that people will, and organizations and leaders will use this as an opportunity to say, wait, this is how we handle this. This is how we show that we value safety. This is how we show that we value voice. And we understand the connection of errors to excellence and how that gives us insight into building stronger systems. So I guess I want to step back a little bit and also talk about how much progress we've made. I mean, we talked about an incident decision tree and an algorithm that 20 years ago was mysterious to many people. And now that is part of the lexicon of healthcare. So even though we're not fully there, we have made a lot of progress. We have made a lot of progress in terms of not making it about blame and really pushing back against the culture of healthcare that tends to blame individuals and tends to stigmatize people who are not perfect. So I expect there will be an effect, a chilling effect, or at least reflection before people report. But I also know that we know how to counteract that because we've done it.
Okay, so there's a very specific question about that because it does come down to the tactics at the end of the day. How do we encourage error reporting in light of the case?
Well, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, so just like with the last question, there's within your sphere of influence as a group leader, as an individual, as a member of society, you modeling these behaviors of humility and appreciation for input will go a long way. You can't fix all the things that are things that you would like to be fixed in the macro system, but you might be an owner of your microsystem. So within your culture, where psychological safety exists, your attitude towards failure and disclosure and reporting will have an impact, even if you can't fix all those micro system issues. Emery?
I also think, in addition to that, there are already a lot of barriers that make reporting hard. And so the focus on what you can do, particularly on making it easy to report, and particularly in actually taking that report and doing something with it so that individuals sees the benefit of what they had to do, both for themselves, their teams, or their patients. That's usually what counts the most in healthcare. And if we can make that loop stronger, that is a huge force that counteracts any other environmental forces. That you act, you say something, it's acted upon, and you see the benefit. It just means you'll act again. You'll speak up again.
Excellent. We have a question in chat. In an organization where it doesn't feel like all the right players on the team for creating psychological safety and our journey to culture are in place, do you have any recommendations for putting value financially on this, enough to perhaps create FTE for physician leader and patient safety? And that we've got 1 minute left to answer that question.
There's a very strong business case for safety. And I think there's been lots of white papers that have pointed that out. There's calculators out there that can help you assess that. But I'll tell you, in our opinion, in my opinion at least, the business case is part of it, but there's a reason that transcends the numbers about why this is the right thing to do, a moral imperative, that should command resourcing for leaders. So I'd have a balanced message. Haven't seen the game one of resourcing when it's just about the numbers. Don't forget the narrative and the other impact. And that's an example of things we'd be happy to talk further with you about how we've seen organizations make the case for resourcing.
I agree. The pandemic has also given us a burning platform on this. It is very clear what the costs of bad systems are, and how the people in the systems pay the price. So if you're going to make the case, make it now.
Well, we are at the top of the hour. On behalf of Huron Consulting Group and the Joint Commission Center for Transforming Healthcare, thank you for joining us.